Hey Journey students, Jadner here, and we're getting ready to continue with our brand new series, Worlds Apart. It is week 2. Let's go. So last week we discussed that science and faith can exist in the same place. They don't necessarily have to be at odds with each other, even though sometimes they're both used to kind of disprove one another. But sometimes we can get really caught up in what we're told. And I know you've felt this way before. Maybe at school or even at church or with friends, you've heard something about another person, maybe another friend, and maybe that thing was super, believable, or maybe it was like not believable at all, or maybe you just didn't exactly know, like, hey, it could be like half true, or maybe it isn't true. And sometimes we get caught in that situation, right? We hear something and we don't know exactly what the truth is. So we tend to ask a lot of questions. We tend to just question in our minds before we even go to that person. We start to think through, okay, well, what do we do? What really happened here? And the truth is that this is especially difficult to navigate with science. I mean, I'm not a scientist, and science is one of the most common things used to disprove God. And every time you get some kind of new information, it's like you don't really know what to believe anymore, right? Because you have this new scientific experiment that comes out, and they start to use it as like a weapon. They weaponize science in a way to use it to disprove God. And I want to say this. It's okay to have questions. I say this pretty often to you. We would rather have you voice your questions, voice your doubt, than sit there in silence. Because in silence, you don't grow. But with questions and with doubt, you can actually grow. Questions are key in building your faith. And so when it comes to, questions being raised and new evidence coming out, it's pretty easy to jump from one science fact to another because they're science, right? They're science facts. So one experiment does one thing, another experiment proves another thing. Okay, so then you gotta pick and choose what is actually truth. But what about when a science experiment is actually up for a challenge against the person? Right? What if a science experiment or science itself challenges a person? That's not like comparing apples to apples. Instead, we're comparing a test to a person. And like I said, you've all had friends or people in your life, maybe friends, that have had a rumor shared about them. And like I said, some of it might be true, some of it might not be true. And either way, you're having a hard time processing it, right? You don't know what to believe. And some of what was shared to you kind of seems legit. The rest, maybe not so much. Well, that's how it feels when science and our faith collide in order to disprove a person rather than another science fact. And why does it feel that way? Why does it feel like it's like gossip? Why does it feel like there's more to the questions that are being asked, the questions that are being raised? Well, it's because God is a person. God is not the wind that moves. God is not a fuzzy feeling or goosebumps. God is a person that is deeply, deeply relational. So when we say God wants a relationship with you, which we say to you every single week, it's because he wants you to talk to him through prayer. He wants you to learn about him, and he wants to talk to you through reading the Bible. He wants to hang out with you and your group of friends through small group. And that's why we have group time. God is relational, and that's why we are so deeply, as human beings, so deeply relational. But here's the thing, God is also extremely detailed, right? So think of the most detailed person you know, and they are still not nearly as detailed as God, right? So you might have a parent, right, that is super detailed. They like everything in a certain order. They notice if one thing is out of order, if it's moved slightly to the left, like an inch, they recognize it. They walk into a room and something's off, and they just know it immediately, right? Well, God is even more detailed than that person. That person might even be you. God is still more detailed than you. And think about how every single snowflake is different. Think about how your fingerprints are unique to only you. No one in the world has your fingerprint. And the Bible even says that God knows all of the hairs on your head. That's crazy when you think about it. God is very complex. But God isn't just a fact. God is a person. So I want to read this verse to you. It's Colossians 1, 15 through 17, and it says this. It says, the Son, which is Jesus, the Son is the image of the invisible God. So Jesus is a person that is the human form of God that we did not and could not see before him. And then it says, he is the firstborn of all creation. So Jesus is the firstborn, meaning he inherits everything. In the Bible, the firstborn was the one that inherited everything. It was not that he was literally born first or created, since Jesus has always existed. If he was always existed, that means he was never created. It just means that he is first in line in receiving everything from God the Father. So I want to just give you this disclaimer. Some people will come to you using this verse, and they will tell you that Jesus was created, and they will even show you with their Bible. But it's not true. And I'll show you as we keep reading why. So it says, for in him all things were created. If Jesus was created, then the original language would have said all other things were created through Jesus. But instead it just says all things were created through Jesus. And those people that I told you would tell you that Jesus was created will actually add the word other into that verse. And I just want you to know that when you see that, that's wrong. Jesus was not created. Jesus has always existed, and everything that was created came through Jesus. There's nothing that has been created that hasn't gone through Jesus. So I don't want you to be tricked by that. So I just want to throw that out there to you. Nothing is left out. Jesus created all things. Every single thing was created by Jesus. And it says things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Listen to all of that complexity. Heaven and earth, visible, invisible, thrones, powers, rulers, authorities, all things created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. That means the gravity that we have, our bodies, everything is held together by the word of the power of Jesus, right? Jesus has it all in his hands. It is his and his alone. And while Jesus is so complex, no legitimate historian has ever questioned that Jesus actually lived. If they have ever questioned that Jesus actually lived, whether they were Christian or not, they're not considered a legitimate historian. You can go to the most atheist historians there are, and they will tell you that without a doubt, Jesus lived. Jesus was a real person. And why is that? Well, because there's things even like extra biblical sources, so that means sources outside of the Bible, that talked about a man named Jesus who claimed to be God. So, I mean, you don't just have to go to the Bible to look for that. It's there. Like, Jesus actually existed. So the question isn't built on if Jesus actually existed. So the questions that we have are if Jesus actually existed. So that's why our foundation is actually in the person of Jesus. Our faith is built on a person who we believe is the God behind all scientific understanding. Understand that when he created everything, that means that he created science in itself. The fact that we can look at things, that we can, in medicine, that we can do the things that we do with pain management and healing and antibiotics, that is science given by God. Literally every single thing was created by Jesus. So Jesus is behind all scientific understanding. Why? Because he created it all. So you can trust someone before you know everything. There will be times where you will be faced with questions about science and faith, and they will be challenging to each other. But here's what I want you to know. You don't have to know everything. You don't. You put your trust in someone, and that someone is Jesus, before you put your trust in everything that you feel like you need to know. Put your trust in the someone who is Jesus. So, the truth is, all of your questions may never be answered on this side of eternity. But that doesn't disprove God. There's so many things that we won't know. So many things that we won't get the facts till way later. But at some point we will. In fact, it just gives you assurance that you can eventually ask God and he will give you the answers. But I want to say this too. Knowing that you may never have explanations to all of your questions doesn't mean that you should stop asking them. Just because you choose to trust Jesus doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your intelligence. Because that's the battle, right? When we feel like our faith is being disproved and we're learning all these crazy things, and a lot of them are really cool. I'll be honest with you. I love science. I just love the inner workings of nature and the human body and all of those things. I love that. And they're absolutely fascinating. But that doesn't mean we don't ask questions. Just because you follow and trust Jesus doesn't mean you don't ask questions and you sacrifice your intelligence. No, let that be a driving force for you to gain intelligence. Let that be a driving force for you to continue to ask questions. Jesus doesn't want like this blind faith, because the truth is like the faith of a Christian isn't blind. There's so much evidence for who Jesus is. Like I said, any like legitimate historian, no matter what college they teach at, will tell you like Jesus actually existed. There is no doubt. So that's what we want you to do. We want you to ask questions. We want you we don't want you to sacrifice your intelligence. We want you to run towards it. And I want you to walk away today knowing that there are two key ideas that we want you to consider as a result of everything we're talking about. Number one, you can ask questions. Ask questions, please. Doubt doesn't kill faith. If you're having doubts, that doesn't mean that your faith is falling apart. But if you're being silent about those doubts, that's where your faith can really start to be damaged. So share what you're feeling. This is a safe place. Share your doubt. If there's something in science that you think is new and difficult and you're having a hard time processing it, talk about it with your group leader. They might not even know the answer, and that's okay. In the same way that you don't know the answer. But you know what? We can walk through that with you because we love you and we want to process those really cool things that we're learning in school about how God works and what science does. So you don't have to shy away from asking hard questions. Instead, you can actually explore them and keep your faith intact. Just remember, you trust the person who's behind all of creation and holds it together. And that doesn't change no matter what. So, as you head to your groups, think about your answer to this question. What would change if your faith was built on a person instead of a need to know everything. Because so often we want to know everything, and that's just a source of pride. But what if, like I said, every legitimate historian in the country and in the world will tell you that Jesus actually existed. So what if your faith was built on the person of Jesus rather than the need to know everything? Well, I'm going to let you go to your groups. I'm going to pass it off to your coordinators, and we will see you guys next week for our final week of the series of Worlds Apart next week. And please make sure you do not forget that on October 30th is our rally night. We will see you then.